Hi, everybody. How are we doing tonight? Okay, I've got a quick question. How many folks in the room are delegates? That's incredible. So this is only my second caucus, and I know a lot of folks have been doing this for years and years and years. And I tried to get as many young people to come to caucus this last week, and they all were so pleasantly surprised with how incredible of an experience it was. They got to meet with their neighbors and have conversations about what it is that they believe in, what kind of representation do they want to see, their frustrations with the party, and why they think there needs to be a change. And that's why I'm running. My name is Melat Kiros, May like the month, a lot like a parking lot to make it a little bit easier for folks. And I immigrated here in 1998 when I was just a baby. And my dad would work all kinds of jobs. He was a security guard, he was a cab driver. My mom, she worked at the airport, she worked at JCPenney, she even drove commercial trucks for a little bit. All of this to help put my dad through pharmacy school because he wanted to do the very best and in the very fastest way he could to help achieve the American dream for our family. And so I watched them work for years to put my dad through school, and I watched them work for years to go through the immigration process. For anybody who knows an immigrant, it takes years, and it takes thousands and thousands of dollars. And they were so proud to get to the very end of that process, become naturalized citizens, and then get asked which party they wanted to affiliate with. And I asked my dad, why Democrats? And he didn't hesitate to tell me, because this is the party that fights for us. It's the party that fights for working people. This is the party that got the New Deal done. This is the party that got fair labor laws. This is the party that got Social Security. This is the party that got the Civil Rights Act. The thing is, though, is that it didn't just happen overnight. The party didn't just wake up and decide to do the right thing. It was pushed to by activists, by dreamers, by people who refused to accept the world as it was. And while I have a great deal of respect for the Congresswoman and her 30 years of service to our district, this is a moment that calls on us to do the very same thing that those activists and dreamers did before, to push the party to do better. And it's not about change just for the sake of change. There has to be direction. I am the only candidate in this race who has refused to take a dime from any corporate PACs. My campaign is entirely funded by everyday people, by teachers, by retirees, by students, by Uber drivers. We have 3,700 individual donors and a $45 average donation. I have over 300 volunteers, over 200 of which are actually signed up here in Colorado, that are ready for the prospect of change. But again, not just change for the sake of it. I am laser focused on addressing and pushing for the kind of bold legislation that would make a meaningful difference for working people. Medicare for all, housing first, universal child care, and with the fires that we're facing right now, abolishing ICE and ending the arms embargo and putting an arms embargo on Israel to end the genocide. These are bare minimum issues that the vast majority of Democratic voters want to see. So why don't they actually happen? Because our representatives don't represent us. They represent their donors. It does not matter what my policy agenda is if I am not addressing that specific fact, the fact that our government is no longer a democracy, but rather an oligarchy. And if we're not talking about that, it does not matter what issues I'm pushing for or what issues we care about. We will always be beholden to those who are the wealthiest and the most powerful, who are constructing the agenda for their own interests. And again, I have a great deal of respect for the Congresswoman. She has been a champion in reproductive justice and environmental justice, but she has also taken millions of dollars from big pharma, big energy and oil, and from defense contractors. We cannot face this future without addressing this particular issue. That is why I have pledged not to wait until I get into office to stop taking that money. I'm saying it right now. And I don't even need it. We are second in fundraising behind the Congresswoman in this race, Because if you can put forward a message that the people believe in, organized people beats organized money every time. And I want to make one last plug for what we've been able to accomplish with this campaign. We are going through the signature process. We are also going through caucus and assembly. And as most of you know, the majority of Coloradans are actually unaffiliated and independent voters. We have had countless people switch their registration just so they could sign our petition, just so they could go to caucus and assembly for this campaign. I'm a proud Democrat because of what Democrats have accomplished historically. And I know that we can do it again. But we cannot do it with the same leadership that got us here in the first place. There has to be a change with direction of where to go next, and one that will fundamentally change the balance of power in Congress for the people. And a lot of folks will say, okay, well, you're saying that now, but what about when you get there? Everybody switches up. One of the things I haven't mentioned yet is that I'm a recovering attorney. I no longer practice for my own health. I practiced for about a year, and I was working at a firm in New York. And this was on the heels of having attended one of the most conservative law schools in the country, which I was not aware of when I got there. I went to Notre Dame. I was there when Donald Trump was president, when the pandemic was happening, when Amy Coney Barrett was nominated to the Supreme Court. And she was actually teaching at Notre Dame at the time. And I was learning about our government. I was learning about a criminal justice system. And so quickly, being in that school, being in that environment where I used to believe that education was the silver bullet, I found myself in classrooms where I was arguing with my classmates about whether or not a single mom should be charged 300% interest rate for trying to buy a fridge, and whether or not that contract should be considered unconscionable. And they were arguing, well, she should have known better. I learned then that the system isn't broken. It's actually working exactly as it was designed. And to be perfectly honest with you, it broke my spirit. I went in there wanting to do good. I went in there wanting to do public service and to use this degree for good. And it made me believe that there was nothing worth doing as an individual because the systems were too broken for there to be a difference made. So I decided, all right, I'm going to go to a big law firm. I'm going to make enough money so I can pay off all of these loans that I just took out, help my parents retire, and call it a day. And then the war started in Palestine, and there were students that were protesting what was happening. And I'm from Tigray, Ethiopia, where there was a genocide just a few years ago. I protested when that happened. I advocated for what was happening there. I sent letters, I reached out to different government officials, and every single time I talked to somebody, they always said, I wish there was something we could do. This is wrong. But there's nothing to be done. But when the students were protesting for what was happening in Palestine, while countless human rights organizations were saying what was happening were human rights abuses and war crimes, verging on the beginning of a genocide, so it was about 2 weeks after October 7th, they were getting fired. One of them got fired from my firm. And so I wrote an article, and I said, that's wrong. Not only is this being considered by all these different organizations to be the very beginnings of a genocide, but as lawyers, we should be protecting our constitutional freedoms, including the freedom of speech. I was asked to take that letter down. I said no, and then I was fired the next day. And it was jarring in the moment, without question, but I said no so fast because I knew that there was a reason why they wanted me to take that letter, because I was speaking truth to power. And I was calling out how these firms were actively participating in the silencing of this dissent, the dissent against our government and another government that was using our taxpayer dollars to commit these atrocities. And I had to make a decision. Was I going to go back to another law firm? What am I going to do? I moved back home within a week. This is where I grew up. We immigrated here to Denver. I'd always been coming back home, and I wanted to be with my friends and my family, and I wanted to be able to figure out, what do I do next? And I was unemployed, so I had a lot of time on my hands. And I was doing a lot of reading and research, trying to understand, okay, what can I do now? And everything kept coming back to this issue of money and politics. Every time. Whether you're talking about environmental justice, economic justice, social justice, all of it comes down to the fact that the vast majority of people agree on a lot of things. We agree that we need to raise the minimum wage. We agree that we need to pay our teachers more. We agree that we want to see things like Medicare for all and universal child care, of which have 70% of the American electorate, but they don't get anywhere in Congress. So I decided to go to CU Denver, where I'm currently getting a PhD in public affairs. I'm focusing specifically on this issue of money and politics. But fun fact, if you live in a blue state versus in a red state, you're more likely to live 5 to 7 years longer. We know that progressive policies save lives. What is holding back the policies from getting enacted? That is where my focus is. That is why I'm running. Again, it's not that Diana DeGette has done harm to our district, but she's not doing enough to address the root causes of how we got here in the first place. And when we take back the House and the Senate and the White House, which we damn sure will, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that happens too. We have to make sure that it's not establishment, do-nothing, corporate Democrats that get back into power. Because if we go back to business as usual, if we go back to the status quo, 6 years from now, there's going to be a Trump wannabe demagogue who's going to start spitting the same lies as Trump and convincing working people that he's going to be the one to solve their problems because we didn't do anything to address them when we took back the power. This is truly a crossroads, not just for our party, but for our country, for democracy, for our planet. And we have a choice to allow the same leadership that was at the helm when all of this unfolded to continue or to go a different path. It's not enough for us to just fight against Donald Trump. We have to fight for something. And I want to fight for a future where you don't go bankrupt because you got sick, where no child will ever go hungry, and where every single person lives with dignity, not just getting by, but the ability to thrive. And I know that that world is possible. And the hundreds of volunteers that have supported this campaign also do too. And in order for us to continue to build this movement, I'm asking for y'all's support at Assembly, by sharing this campaign with your friends and your family, and by just believing. Because honestly, that's what's going to be what makes all of the difference in this midterm and every race that comes after this. The faith and the audacity to believe that a better world is possible. Thank y'all so much. Do we have any questions? Don't be shy, y'all. Hold my feet to the fire. All right, yes.
How do we fight election being rigged by him in so many ways? It's really horrible.
Without question. The gerrymandering that we're seeing, and for folks that might not have heard as well, how are we going to address the rigged elections that are inevitably coming, right? The gerrymandering was designed to set the stage for him to try and get a third term. We know that. And I'm really, really proud to know that there are organizations that are working to get onto the ballot a redistricting measure for Colorado so that we can also fight back in the way that California and Virginia have been. Now, I actually agree with Wanda. We have to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act without question. The problem is, how do we get a majority in the House and the Senate to make that happen? Who is preventing that legislation from going forward? And we have to put pressure on the people that are currently going to still be there the next time this comes up to make sure that they do not take the same vote that they did before. And identifying who those people are right now as well, because that's what the midterms are supposed to be. And again, it's always going to go back to money in politics. 84% of the people in the House right now, they outraised their opponent. That is the most likely indicator that you will win your seat. You just outraise your opponent. What I'm really focused on is a root cause issue. I don't like Band-Aids. If we want to fundamentally change how government works so that it actually works for us, we need publicly financed elections. Any other reform below that is not enough. And I want to say that this is important for our district because we have publicly financed elections in Denver. We are one of the very few cities across the entire country that has them. If you donate a small donation to a city or local candidate, the city matches that donation by 9 times. If y'all were seeing what was happening with the mayoral race in New York with Zohran Mamdani, I think Zohran Mamdani is a once-in-a-generation political talent. Regardless of what you agree with his politics, the man is charismatic, he is welcoming, he is warm, and he's willing to come to the table with anybody, right? But that doesn't matter. Because the reason why he won is because he had $8 million in city funding powering his campaign. By the end of that race, Cuomo and Mamdani were spending the exact same amount. This is how we can make sure that voters have all of the available options and are hearing from all of the candidates to make an informed choice. Not just because they've heard so much from the person who has the millions of dollars to pay for the ads and the mail and the literature. That's what makes the real difference here. Thank you for your question. Gary.
Would you please tell us about your experience with leadership?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. Okay, let's see. I could start from when I was in like elementary school, and I would be the one that raised my hand to do this. I have always kind of sought out leadership positions, at least when I was younger. And it would be, you know, president of the club, or I was president of my student body association, whatever the case was. But all that was, you know, I was a kid. And it wasn't until law school that I really started to think about leadership in a very different way. In one that it's really the most valuable when it's not necessarily about your own leadership attributes, but your ability to recognize the leadership attributes of others around you and identifying those people to work with you and your team. And this campaign actually came together because I had spoken with, I imagine most of y'all know Howard right over here taking video. He and I worked on another campaign on the 4th District for John Pedora. When I moved back home, I wanted to help again with the party and pushing us in that direction. And John was the only candidate at the time calling for a ceasefire. So I was his comms director for a portion of his campaign. And it started with conversations about how do we run for office? What does it look like? What does it look like to run for office when you are not the establishment pick? And what does it look like to run a campaign where people actually believe in and want to support the mission behind it? And for me, it really was a matter of making sure that it's the message that leads this campaign, because it's not about me. I'm not going to go into Congress and wave a magic wand and pass Medicare for all and Housing First and universal child care, although I wish I could. It's about identifying the actual problem at hand, providing a real solution that addresses it, and bringing together a team of people that have the exact same mission to do the same thing. And so one of the things that I think is really important about this race and this mission that I have is finding and working with other candidates in other districts across the country as well. And so I'm really proud to say that I've actually been endorsed by Justice Democrats. These are the same folks who found AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Summer Lee, and are working towards this mission of building a progressive majority in Congress and making sure that we have the means to pass the kind of legislation that we want to see. And to more closely answer your question, as far as leadership specifically, the greatest leaders that I've had in my life are the ones who mentored me and helped me identify where are my strengths, where are my weaknesses, how can I continue to grow. And one of the things I'm really proud about our campaign is that we have a fellowship program where high school students, college students, and young professionals can earn some type of credit, but really just gain experience on how to run in a campaign, how to win, but really how to organize. This campaign, I said from the very beginning, obviously our number one concern is to win, right? Yes, I will say that. But the second is that we need to build more progressive infrastructure in our state. We are a blue state. That is without question. But there is also a lot of infighting between corporate Democrats and progressive Democrats. And progressive Democrats, frankly, do not have the infrastructure that we need to actually be competitive. And so one of the things we've been able to do with this campaign is work with DSA, work with Sunrise, work with all kinds of younger organizations, environmental organizations that are really focused on the electoral politics of actually being effective, because that's where we've been struggling as a party for a long time. So those are some of the pieces that I really focus with on this campaign and what we're trying to get across. Thank you. Thought I saw one other hand in the back. I am so grateful for y'all sticking around. I know, I imagine
No,
that.
no, you're
Oh,
fine. We're good on time.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions that people submitted.
Absolutely.
What have you done or been a part of for the Denver community?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I immigrated here in 98. It was Lowry that we immigrated to. And I mentioned earlier, I'm Ethiopian. So a lot of my community is rooted in the Ethiopian community. And I don't have to tell y'all how rooted the Ethiopian community is within Denver and within the area at large. And so second half of my childhood was spent out in Aurora. I went to Eagle Crest High School. And coming back after law school and working in New York, one of the things that I really wanted to do was make sure that young people actually felt some kind of agency in our future. I told y'all when I was in law school, it broke my spirit. It really did. To the point where I didn't really have hope for our future. And obviously I got out of that hole and wanted to do something to make a big difference. But I knew that we had to get other young people to feel that kind of hope and energy as well too. So one of the first things I did was I joined the Denver Young Democrats. And my first meeting that I was there was 5 of us, and 4 of them were board members. So we weren't really off to a great start. But after Trump won, there was regrettably a lot of folks who were like, I probably should have done more. And I'm a call-in person. I'm not a call-out. If you wish you could have done more, all right, here's your chance. Here's how we're going to build more together. And here's how we're going to get young people plugged in. Now, if you go to a Denver Young Democrats meeting, there are 30, 40 people or so coming at a time. And I remember one of the first meetings that we had was actually at Whittier Cafe. If anybody's been, that is the coffee shop that I also barista at every Wednesday morning, if you ever want to stop by. And if you know, Whittier Cafe is a social justice cafe that really focuses on making it an open and communal space for people who are like-minded and want to do good. And so I'm really proud of the work that we've done with young Democrats, because frankly, we dropped the ball in the last election. We didn't have enough young people coming out to support Harris and to support Democrats at large. And we're not going to make that same mistake again.
Any other questions? I guess I still have a question. Well, you know, Diana DeGette was one of the young Dems in her day. And she supports health care for all. Why would, I think the gentleman who asked the earlier question, why would we want to trade the next chair of the Health Committee when we take over the House for a freshman legislator in a body where seniority, no argument about seniority, that process being reformed over time, but that's what you're walking into. Just as you walked into the law school, you walked into the corporate law firm you walked into. why would voters change that opportunity to be represented by the chair of the House Health Committee?
Absolutely. That's a fantastic question and an important one, without question. Diana DeGette will likely receive the chair of the Health and Energy Subcommittee. It's not guaranteed. There still would have to be a vote, but she will likely get the chair. And with that chair, I have every belief that she will push through Medicare for All and make sure that it goes to the floor. That does not actually help get Medicare for All passed. The reality is there are still too many corporate Democrats in the House that are bought by big pharma and by health insurance companies who have no interest in pissing off their donors to pass something like Medicare for All. And that's why it's so important to not look at this race for just what can be done in the next 2 years. Republicans have been playing a long game for 65 years. Donald Trump feels like he came out of nowhere. And he did. He kind of surprised the Republicans a little bit too. But they have been working for decades to reform our campaign finance laws, to pack the courts. I literally watched professors of mine that worked with the Federalist Society to handpick some of my classmates to start going onto that judgeship track. I literally have a classmate that's clerking right now for Kavanaugh. They've been playing this for a long, long time. We have to have the same long-term strategy if we want to be even half as effective as they have been at destroying our institutions over the last few decades. And that has to start and end with reforming our campaign finance laws. That is the only way. To put it into a little bit of context, if there is a bill in the House that 80% of Americans, regardless of party lines, 80% of Americans support it, or 80% of Americans oppose it, doesn't matter. It has a 30% chance of passing every time. If it's a bill that corporations and lobbyists support, 72% chance of passing. That is what we're up against. 67% of Americans support Medicare for All. 72% of Americans support universal child care. We want to see these things pass. Our representatives don't care though, because they're representing their donors. And I want to say this, because I don't think most of our representatives are sitting there in a corner trying to figure out how to make our lives miserable. The thing about representatives in Congress is that their number one priority is to get reelected, because they have an agenda of things that they want to do, and they can't do it if they can't get back into office the next 2 years. So how are you going to get reelected? You raise the most money. How do you raise the most money? You keep your donors happy. This is a system that incentivizes our representatives to listen to their donors over their voters. That is why we cannot expect seniority to deliver the kind of policies that we've all been demanding. It has to be fundamental change that happens, and that's going to have to start with publicly financed elections.